Prime Minister, as we begin 2023, one of the biggest fears is the type of global economy we're going to be facing. A third of the world is anticipated to be in recession. How do you think Spain will weather the rest of this year?
Well, what the international institutions are saying is that Spain will grow by 1 point something, so above the average of the European Union. And precisely this is what we are witnessing over the past months and last year. We grew by, well, over 5% of our GDP. Our inflation rate is the lowest within the European Union, and we are also witnessing a very strong job creation, thanks to all the reforms that we are implementing, and of course the European Union funds and the labour reform that we delivered last year.
You have a very big spending programme, a record budget cap, which means you've got a truckload of money, 199 billion euros to spend. But that said, your debt to GDP has still got fairly high numbers around it. At what point will you stop spending your way out of the crisis to tackle the debt situation again?
Well, first of all, if we compare the situation in Spain and Europe with the financial crisis and the response that we gave at that time, we have the next generation funds. And this will imply to Spain more or less 160 billion euros on public investments for a green transition and digital transformation over the next years. So this is one of the main pillars of our political economy. The second is, of course, the structural reforms, labor market, pension reforms, vocational training, education, university reforms, startup law. 190 reforms we already delivered over the past 3 years. And the third pillar is fiscal consolidation. What we are forecasting is by 2025 to reach a public deficit of 2.9% and below 110% of our GDP on public debt. So we are committed with that fiscal consolidation, but without killing the economic growth and job creation that, of course, is needed also to reduce and to achieve those goals on our fiscal consolidation.
And yet, sir, not just in Spain, we've seen it in the UK, we've seen it in France, but we've also seen a lot of workers very upset about what you're doing. We saw it in Madrid on Sunday as well, over 30,000 workers protesting against various government initiatives as well. And we have elections later in the year. Do you think the combination of a lack of popularity of some of your reforms and some of your actions, plus the fact you have elections later in the year, and we have regional elections before that as well, is going to hamstring you and actually handicap your ability to tackle the crisis full on?
Well, so far it was the opposite. We implemented very strong structural reforms with the dialogue and also with agreement of social actors, of course, business associations and trade unions, labor reform, pension reforms. And on the other hand, of course, we are devoting most of these public funds to all these structural reforms. So, you know, I think that in this very uncertain context, economic context within the European Union due to this war in Ukraine, I think that the achievements and the positive let's say, economic development of Spain is one of our major assets. So, you know, we're confident on our economic growth, the deployment of job creation. So far, what we're witnessing is that still remain a very strong job creation in Spain, also throughout Europe. And we'll see what happens in this year.
But it's very interesting. One of the pillars of that you just mentioned was the COVID recovery plan. Well, of course, since the COVID recovery plan, we've seen the most devastating war we've seen in Europe since 1945, which is ongoing. We've seen a cost of living crisis, which is ongoing. Interest rates, the cost of money has gone up. Spaniards and Europeans are really, really suffering as well. Have those COVID recovery funds just been overwhelmed by events and are just not enough to sustain growth?
Not at all. I think that these COVID funds and next generation funds gave us the tools in order to give a positive response to this economic crisis, because we are devoting, I would say, 80% of these 160 billion euros for the next years on digital transition and ecological transition. Just to give you some figures, thanks to these funds, what we are achieving is transforming Spain into the fifth economy in the world on wind production, the eighth on renewable energy. So, we are transforming and modernizing our economy. Also on digital, we are trying to attract investments and global companies on semiconductors and chips. This is what we did, and we tried to develop since last year here also in Davos. And on the other hand, so far we already approved before our national parliament 5 packages in order to, at the domestic level, to respond to this economic and energy crisis. And the results and the outcome of these packages, and also the reforms that we are asking, and we've been very vocal since the beginning at the European Union level, is that we reduce in 5 months 5 points of our inflation rates. We in Spain have the lowest inflation rate of the European Union, and this is thanks to our responses at national level, but also other issues that we achieve at European level, such as the Iberian mechanism.
Can I dig a little bit further into the European fiscal policy? Because the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has demanded a response to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. He wants Europe to draft its own legislation because, simply put, European companies are now finding it more appealing to invest in the United States. How necessary is the legislation, and when is it coming?
So I think, first of all, it's good news that the United States is engaged with this ecological transition. They are the first economic power, so to say, worldwide, and this is good. Second, I think that after the war in Ukraine, what we need to do is to get closer, both regions, the United States and also the European Union. So I think it's important, the negotiation process that we are now within this committee, together European Union and the US, trying to reach an agreement that it could be worth for both sides. And also I think that from our side, the European Union side, we need to learn and we need to reform some internal aspects of our industrial policy, such as the state aid, reducing bureaucracy, and trying to send a message for the industry worldwide that is Europe and of course Spain is a good place to locate and to develop all this.
Prime Minister, this is all sounding very civilised, but the response from Europe has been slightly less civilised. The Belgian Prime Minister the other week was calling this a very aggressive campaign from the Americans here to steal away European investment. The French President's not happy with the moves either. Could we see a trade fight brewing between the United States and Europe because of this policy?
I hope not. I think that we need to have that dialogue to reach an agreement. I think that this war also shows us the importance of unity on the defense side, but also on the economic side within the Western countries. And this is something that is, I would say, mandatory for the US administration and also for the European Union as a whole, and member states. This is what we've been advocating. But apart from that, I think that internally we have some homework to do. And this homework means how do we reduce bureaucracy, how do we review our state aid policy, and how do we give a common response to common challenges that we have within the European Union.
Prime Minister, let me change tack, and we've referenced a couple of times the war in Ukraine. I speak to a lot of people, Karen does as well. I don't know how Europe can find a diplomatic solution with the Kremlin and with Kiev to get out of this crisis. Europe has a key role, of course, in supporting Mr. Zelensky and his government and the country of Ukraine. Can you see a path at all to a diplomatic solution? Or are we going to end up in a frozen conflict which, for all intents and purposes, started in 2014 and could be going for another 10 years, let alone the last 10 years?
Well, I think it's this is the question, no? And I don't, unfortunately, have an answer, a clear answer. What I know is what we must do, which is unity, We have to back, of course, Zelensky and Ukrainian citizens in their fight against Putin. I think it's important this war in the sense that in a way what is at stake is the respect of territorial integrity, an international order based in rules. So this is very important also for the European Union and the international community as a whole. I think that, of course, Europe must be on the table when these conversations will open. I hope soon, but we'll see what happens. I always advocated to have France and Germany, since they belong to this Normandy format and the Minsk agreement, to be part of the conversations and the dialogue with Russia. And of course we support this peace solution, these 10 points that Zelensky shared with the rest of the leaders at the G20 summit in Bali.
But Putin's gone the other way. He's integrated 5 regions in total, including Crimea, of Ukraine territory into Russia as well. Whilst Russia says they are part of Russia and Ukraine says they are part of Ukraine, there is no way for dialogue to work necessarily. Is Europe in this, no matter what it costs economically, to support Zelensky?
Well, this is for sure, because we understand quite well what is at stake. And what Putin is trying also to, the message that he's trying to send to the European Union and the international community, which is, I don't respect territorial integrity, I don't respect this international order based on rules, and this is something that we cannot accept. Because what is at stake is not only the European security, but the global security. But apart from this, and this is what I'm going to share with the rest of leaders tomorrow, it is important not only to point out the responsibilities of Putin, but also what are the homework, or what is the homework that we have to do within the international community. We need to respond to the food crisis. We need to, of course, strengthen multilateral framework and institutions that are now, I would say, undermined by Putin and his war. Third, I think it's important that we face the reality that we have a big climate crisis that we need to answer in a much more effective way, not only on the public side, but also the private sector. And finally, I think it's important that we coordinate our response to this other global challenge, which is inequality. You mentioned before, middle class, low income workers, what they ask for their politicians is, how do we respond to this inflation rate spike and the energy prices? And this is something that we try to respond in Spain, but also in Europe.
Prime Minister, many demands on the public purse, which you just explained there, but if we look at your contribution to military aid to Ukraine, it's been underwhelming versus other European nations. By numbers, the Kiel Institute was saying it was 56 million euros in September last year versus, 153 million from Italy. You've got 743 million from Germany, basically less than 0.1% of the aid that Kyiv has received so far. There are promises made after this around more support, but is this the year where you bolster the financial aid and military weapons?
In my last conversation with Zelensky some weeks ago, he was really grateful for the support of the Spanish government and the exportation of military capabilities to Ukraine, the humanitarian aid that we provide to Ukrainian society, and of course the refugees that we are attending in my country. So, we are very supportive. We are supporting Zelensky and Ukraine. And we will do so, during all this war, because we're committed with, this territorial integrity, this international order based on rules, and of course, we will be there not only on this, but also the financial aid that through the European Union institutions we are providing, nurturing this financial aid through our national budget. I mean, all member states of the European Union.
Let me give you a chance to talk about energy security, because there are big moves afoot to try and correct the system across Europe. A new underwater gas pipeline between Spain and France, Barcelona now to Marseille. What does this project bring in terms of energy security for Europe?
Well, I think that not many people knows, but Spain represents 1/3 of the total regasification capacity of the European Union. Second, we are, I would say, not the largest, but one of the largest providers of renewable energy, not only in Europe, but also in the world. We concentrate 20% of the total green hydrogen projects worldwide in Spain. As I mentioned before, we are the eighth country in the world on renewable energy. So, we are very committed with this green transition, and we are ready to help our colleagues in the European Union. And for that, what we need is interconnections. And this is a very critical project, and this will be the largest green hydrogen interconnection project in the European Union for the, I would say, next decade. So, we will have a bilateral summit together with France in Barcelona next Thursday, and we're very excited with this European project that will provide, as you mentioned before, energy security for all the European Union.